Welcome Kerry Benninghoff, the House Majority Leader, Republican from the Bellefonte area, serving Center and Mifflin counties here at the Express Community Newspaper. We're glad you came to talk to us about the issues that are important to you and to our readers. With us today is Chris Morelli, one of the reporters here, one of our senior reporters, Karen Kennedy, who's a multimedia editor, and I'm Bob Raleigh, the publisher of the Express Community Newspaper and lockhaven.com. So thanks, Kerry, for coming in. You're a busy man as the House Majority Leader. We appreciate all the work you do and your availability to us and your offer to come here and talk to us today. So we'd like to start with just asking you what's going on in Harrisburg, what's important, what are your voters and taxpayers and residents telling you that they want to have done or to see done through our state government.
Well, thank you, Bob, and everybody else. We do appreciate being here. We respect that you have a job to help keep your constituents and your readers informed, and our goal is to do the same thing. A lot of times what people hear in Harrisburg are just kind of tidbits from other types of medias from the Harrisburg area. And I like being hands-on. It's one of the reasons I stay at this level of government. I like being able to be around my constituents, people I go to church with, and people that I'm in a neighborhood with. Really in the forefront of most people's minds right now is employment, getting people back to work. I don't know at a time where I've seen more help wanted signs, more signs advertising sign-on bonuses, and really respectable wages for starting employment. And that's a good thing from the employees' perspective, but the employers are really, really struggling. As we come out of the waning days of this pandemic, our goal obviously is about re-stimulating our economy. It was devastating to see how fast you could go from a very strong, robust economy to really higher unemployment numbers than what we've seen probably in the last decades in Pennsylvania's history and country as a whole. So that said, recovery is very, very important. Part of my goal has been looking at government and what our role is, and predominantly in areas of regulation. Oftentimes people talk about businesses not wanting higher taxes. Well, that's an important issue to them. We also find consistency in regulations very important. So one of the things we recently did pass a package of bills out of the House of Representatives dealing with regulatory reform, but I've also sent letters off to the governor in conjunction with several of my committee chairmen. Our chairmen all have purview over certain parts of government. Whether you're in finance, you may have purview over revenue, Department of Lottery, etc. And we asked the governor, over the last 13, 14 months, there's been a lot of regulations that have been suspended. The question begs to ask, are these regulations still needed? Can they be modified? And more importantly, can we make them modern to today's needs? And I think government has a responsibility to do that regardless of a pandemic or not, and this is a great opportunity to do that. It's been a little slow getting response to that. We actually saw an executive order that came out by the administration. It was very parallel to what we were asking, which is fine by me. I'm not about titles or credit. I'm about getting things done. And so we've had a subsequent dialogue. I actually called the governor. We talked one-on-one about this, and they've agreed to provide us answers to those questions, and more importantly, hopefully, to work together to look at these things and say, what is going to make Pennsylvania more attractive and more helpful for the business community? You don't have to drive around too many of our neighborhoods where we still see a lot of businesses shut down. If you look at the two major urban areas of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, I've never seen so many shuttered businesses, some of which are not coming back. Some of our small businesses will not be coming back, but we need that employment. Pennsylvania's been struggling because of having what we call a structural deficit, where our expenditures and our needs are greater than the income coming in. And I think we have a responsibility to try to find a way to break that and try to get us back on track, both from a budgetary balance perspective and two, from a cash flow. And that happens when people get back to work and the economy has revenue flowing. And to me, that's not only good just for the economy, but it's good for those individuals as well. So we're looking at those types of areas. We did some COVID relief. As you know, we had some bills passed to try to reopen government and reopen businesses in general. We need to get state workers back to work. There are different departments where they do not have full complements back in the building. As the COVID numbers continue to plummet and vaccine numbers go up, we've got a larger percentage of our community vaccinated. I think people's comfort levels are there. State government has a responsibility to be available, and some of these departments need to get their full complement of individuals back to work. Whether it's inspectors for labor and industry, DEP, ag, whomever it is, we do have many employers who are frustrated that it's taking weeks on end to get responses or get someone out to do the inspections. As you know, we're in the construction period now in our communities with the better weather, and that happens to be one of our great employees. Unfortunately, we have skyrocketing prices for a lot of materials and still trying to get some manpower back to work. With the money that's been coming out of Washington, it's somewhat discouraging for employees to go back to work because some were actually making more money on unemployment versus what they could be earning on a day-to-day basis. I think as Americans, we've always prided ourselves on the importance of work. I was very blessed to have a father who worked very hard. I watched my father get laid off, unfortunately, at 58 and again at 79 and a half. And he continued to find work and worked till he was 85 years old. That's always inspired me, and I want to inspire other people because at the end of the day, going to work, earning a paycheck, and going home to take care of your families is what I believe the American dream is about, and I think it's helpful. So in government, we're looking at those types of things. We'll continue to do that. We have an extensive package of bills that we'll be doing when we go back into session next week, and obviously election reform is going to be part of that. But most importantly, we have a very important election tomorrow, and there are some questions on the ballot. And we've asked individuals to look at those. We are very frustrated, as you know, that they were written very convoluted, but it's a very simple question whether or not in a disaster declaration, any disaster declaration with any administration, not specifically just this one, should a governor have unilateral power to, one, call the disaster declaration, two, to continue it endlessly. Many people don't realize, but Pennsylvania is currently under 3 disaster declaration. One regarding the opioid addiction issue has been going on for over 6 years. And if you look at the numbers of individuals still dying from opioid addiction problems, they have not decreased in that 6 years of disaster declaration. So the question again would beg to ask is, what is the disaster declaration doing? Tomorrow specifically, you, the voters, will have the opportunity to make a decision on whether or not the General Assembly should have some shared voice in this. You elect House members, Senate members to represent you. We are more intimately involved, and you may have access to a sitting governor. And we believe at the end of the day, there should be some shared responsibility and shared participation in that. Most recently, as you may know, we've been asking for more involvement since the beginning of the pandemic 14 months ago. But 2 months ago, we pushed very hard to try to get a vaccine rollout task force. Pennsylvania's vaccine rollout was abysmal at best, and it was kind of spotty, who could get it, who couldn't get it, what age groups you fell in, who fell in, those types of things. And so we finally were able to get the administration to agree with that, and then we saw how that process with participation by the General Assembly along with the administration made that run much smoother. We even specifically asked for a specific rollout for teaching institutions, education, any employee, not just teachers themselves, but anyone that worked in and around the teaching atmosphere. To get these vaccines, we made a specific program to do that, to get our children back in schools, allowing parents to be able to get back to work. It's been very challenging, and I'll close on that, for parents who all of a sudden had to become teachers at home, some of them working from home in addition to that, or working alternate shifts with their spouse in order to be able to provide the child care that's also providing teaching within the home and still trying to be employed for those that were able to go back to work. So we believe that kind of joint relationship with the administration in these types of things. And I'm respectful that we're going to have differing opinions on a multitude of issues. But at the end of the day, what's best for the people of Pennsylvania? Whether it's a vaccine rollout, getting people back to work, getting children in school, and growing our economy, I think there's a lot of things that we can do together to make that happen.
Yeah, one of my questions was there's been a lot of talk about integration at Lockhaven University, obviously. What are your thoughts on that topic?
Well, it's a wonderful school. I just said to Jason on the way down, I wish I would have had a little bit more encouragement when I was younger. That's about the size of school I would have liked to have gone to, but we're also very cognizant of what this university means to the community, the job employment it provides, the spin-off businesses. The integration system that is being proposed by the chancellor is about trying to keep the system and make it grow stronger. And you see this in private businesses at times, and where they will have shared services in their administration, and I think that's really what the chancellor is talking about, is trying to strengthen the system. I know sometimes change is fearful for people, but I think we don't have to look at recent history. If we do nothing or try to do, just let things go, what will be the end result? We may end up having some of these schools that will not have enough students enrolling. They will not have the financial resources. So I think trying to buddy up some of the different schools and shared responsibilities, whether it's administrative and the billing departments or whatever else in some of the administrative roles, will hopefully provide needed services, but allow some autonomy here on the local levels for the actual physical plants, but have some of the administrative things done on a larger global level. At the end of the day, we want to sustain the system. We know the value in it. I personally value it. I like the smaller schools like this. I think they're more intimate. It gives the children, young people, pardon me, the opportunity to get an education, and sometimes get an education in a place that's closer to home. For those who don't have the financial resources, they can stay at home and still go to school. And for those who choose to come to a different community, I have a friend of mine who he said he was actually heading to IUP and happened to come through this area, stopped in, loved the community, ended up being a graduate of Lock Haven University, never even thought about going there. It's those kinds of experiences that we want future generations to be able to enjoy.
That said, let me ask, so the Board of Governors has approved the integration information recommendations.
Yes.
And then they'll vote again in July. Meanwhile, the House and the Senate will be approving a budget with funding for higher education. What's going on there? Do you see some reasonable increase coming for the fiscal 2021-22?
Well, as I said earlier, our goal is to make sure that we fund people to the best of our ability. I tell people to kind of budget right now as though it's going to be level funding from where we were last year, and then we'll kind of see where we may have the opportunity to provide some additional funding. I would personally say that if we want to help our state-owned system, and we want to help the chancellor, who I believe very strongly wants to see this be successful and is trying to make some very tough decisions. He's in a very tough position because he's telling people what we need to hear, not necessarily what people always want to hear. It's kind of like being a parent. Then we need to be helping them financially to do that. And if there's some additional financial needs, which I believe there are for the state system, we need to pony up and make sure they're there because we want to sustain great schools like Lock Haven.
Thanks.
I'm going to circle back to kind of your opening statement,
Sure.
if that's okay. And since the start of the pandemic, you've been outspoken about the restrictions put into place
Yes.
by Governor Wolf. What would you have done differently?
Well, as I said from the beginning, the concern was that these decisions were being made strictly out of the administration, and when pushed and we asked what science or who's making these decisions, that's still an unknown. 14 months later, we don't know if the decisions were made only by the governor and then Secretary of Health, Dr. Levine. We were all concerned about the pandemic. We all want people to be protected and be healthy. But at the end of the day, we have a General Assembly for a reason. And it was frustrating for us to be called an hour before a press conference would happen and be told, oh, by the way, we're going to do X, Y, Z. And if you look at even the simple decisions as far as trying to decide who was essential and who was not essential, that seemed to be kind of, I would call it darts in the dark. You kind of just shut your eyes and throw a dart, and all of a sudden this person was determined, or this business. It was very frustrating for many of our smaller businesses when this decision to shut them down happened so abruptly. And it happened whether it was a church, whether it was a restaurant. These people had very little time to prepare. We had weddings that were planned. People had a large amount of supplies purchased, and all of a sudden, boom, a week from now, you can't have this wedding. 2 weeks. I think if we had a more combined relationship between the administration and General Assembly, at least as you said, asked me, I would have wanted that input. Tell me what's going up in Tioga County. What's happening in Crawford County? What's best? Jason and I were just talking on the way down here. If you look at Sullivan County, I think they've had 479 COVID cases. So to pass a blanket order across the Commonwealth for whatever decisions, whether business is closing or whatever else, that's going to be the same in downtown Philadelphia as the way you're going to implement the same thing in Sullivan County. It seemed to be ridiculous, and it was very hurtful for some of those small communities to be shut down. And frankly, we just would have liked a little more flexibility and all that.
Governor Wolf has said he wants to raise the minimum wage. You've been quoted as saying the wage is taking care of itself. Can you clarify what you mean by that?
Yes, if you look in a free enterprise system, when there's a demand for labor and there's less there available, people offer higher wages. And I can quote you multiple businesses right now that are paying $15 an hour, if not more. As I said earlier on, there's probably more sign-on bonus signs around than I've ever seen. You pull up the local McDonald's, you look at the different types of convenience stores. Matter of fact, I was in Walmart and there was a sign hanging in a restroom the other day. Overnight stalkers, $14 an hour with a differential paid for being there overnight of an additional $1.50. That's $15.50 an hour. We've seen advertisements for over $20 an hour for people just to be dishwashers. Demand for manpower is so great right now. Different businesses are paying higher wages. For government to artificially set some base rate generally only tells a business that you have a certain amount of dollars to pay for wages, and you have to pay everybody at least this certain amount. Well, that sounds good on the front. It really doesn't necessarily give these people much better buying power. Prices will go up accordingly. Our goal is to let people strive to earn as much as they possibly can. I would like to see everyone become a millionaire each day. And we can do that if we provide them opportunities, provide them the proper education. But as I said, in free enterprise system, it shows how this has already happened organically and does not artificially need to be done by the government setting a particular rate. And suppose we were to do it at the $12.50, and now we have businesses who are already offering more than that. Would have that kept them from offering more dollars? This is me as a business owner showing the value of you by offering you more because I need you. And that's what I think the American dream is about.
The Governor Wolf administration has said they want to see the legalization of marijuana in the state. As states bordering Pennsylvania begin to legalize it, what are your thoughts on the matter?
Well, I'm not one to copycat other states. There are some that get elected positions and they model some of their own decision making by neighboring states. It goes back to the earlier conversation. As a Commonwealth, we did vote, and I actually was part of that study committee for allowing medical marijuana to see what effectiveness there is with that, treating certain symptoms. I have a nominal experience in healthcare. I knew it was not something that was necessarily going to cause cures, but I was willing to allow people, patients, to make decisions with their physicians to deal with ailments, side effects of other treatments by utilization of medical marijuana. Well, that's still somewhat in its infancy. We really have not had an opportunity to see the effect of that. And one of the things I put in that particular proposal was basically some type of study that as a physician, you could put documentation in there, and it worked like almost a case study that would be non-identifying for a patient, but another doctor who may think about doing this a year or two later could look and say, well, this doctor treated 5 patients with these types of ailments and had these types of successes. One of the things people don't realize is we're hindered that the federal government still has marijuana scheduled as a #1 drug. The lower the number, the higher the regulations. So it has not even gone through clinical studies. So the piece that we put into the legislation would basically operate like a clinical study here in Pennsylvania's level to get that data, and future physicians could look into that. So we're still kind of in the infancy. At the end of the day, there are those who will advocate, and I'm generally a liberty individual in my thinking, but 2 things I would say to you is, number 1, if you still have a state that's losing somewhere between 14 to 15 people a day from opioids, that's 300 people a month, dying in Pennsylvania. Do we really want to legalize another substance on top of that until we get this other problem under control? Because there are those who get into using opioids through a legal manner. They were prescriptions, and then subsequently, when they get shut off in some of the laws that we changed, they turn to the streets. Number 2, I don't like these types of things being used as a means of generating cash. A lot of people will use that as an excuse. Well, the government can make a lot of money off this. Well, the government can make a lot of money off a lot of things, but I'm just not ready to go down that road. And I know that's not popular with some people, but I think we can sustain Pennsylvania's economy and grow it in much better, more effective manners than legalizing marijuana. And the last thing I'll say to that, I have a friend of mine who went to Colorado not long after they did that, and he thought he was going to get rich quick and get into this industry. But he saw the negative impact of what happened and the fact that their numbers of DUI and being under the influence of marijuana had increased significantly. So I think as a community, as a state, we got to go cautiously and think about all the implications of legalizing this and whether or not we really want to go down that road.
During the pandemic, obviously, we saw mail-in voting, we saw drop boxes throughout the state. As we begin to get out of the pandemic, do you want to see those things stay or disappear, or what are your thoughts on mail-in voting and drop boxes and those sorts of things?
Well, at the end of the day, we want to have a election system that people are comfortable with and that people feel are secure. I think the frustration in last year's election cycle, regardless of what stripes you wear and who you may support, was the ever-changing rules almost up to election day. If you know, the former Secretary of State, Ms. Bukvar, made some different decisions throughout the election process. People had, in some cases, had already voted, and then they're trying to determine whether or not we would accept ballots where somebody did not sign the outside of it. The mail-in system is designed to be a ballot you call for. It's mailed to you, you fill it out, and you mail it back. You can argue about drop boxes, and they were a little more convenient, obviously, during the pandemic, but your drop box is really the mailbox at the end of your driveway, if you're talking about a mail-in system. We've had absentee ballots where people could vote by mail, but at the end of the day, we want people to feel secure about the system. We had passed House Bill 2828, which did not get through the rest of the chamber and the neighboring chamber, which would have at least required cameras on those drop boxes, so somebody couldn't put a handful of ballots in there, or require them to be manned. At the end of the day, I think most voters were frustrated by the inconsistent rules. If you saw, there was a Senate race out in the West that was determined. This senatorial race overlapped into more than one county. One county allowed ballots to be counted after Election Day that came in 2 or 3 days later. The other county did not. That inconsistency, even by the court standards, said, yes, this is wrong, this needs corrected, but you need to correct it in the future. Well, that doesn't help the candidate who would have won had they consistently voted the ballots the same way in each county. So at the end of the day, my goal is to have continuity, have security. I want a system that people have comfort in. Whether it's mail-in ballots, going to the polls, it does not prohibit you from still going to the polls to vote, but it's got to be secure. If people don't have faith in their election system, they're not going to have faith in their government.
Where do you see the economic and environmental future of this area, and what steps need to be taken to move toward that future?
Well, I think we have to look at some of the God-given commodities that we have, and we see the natural gas industry, which some support, some don't. But I would challenge people to think about their daily life. Everything you use in life is either grown by a farmer or mined out of the ground. Whether it's a microphone, whether it's your glasses, whether it's your cell phone, whether it's the wooden tables. And so we have to figure out how we use these industries to the best of our ability. I think with our regulatory process, we're probably far more conscientious about how we ascertain these assets than we were in the past. Environmental cleanup from the coal days is still going on, and people don't realize that sometimes when they don't like to see people digging, whether it's a farmer or a builder or someone getting limestone in the earth, we use a lot of these things in very constructive ways. Limestone, especially the pure Valentine limestone, my understanding is actually used in some of our medical applications because it's able to take impurities out in dialysis. We use lime products to be a neutralizer when we're trying to clean up strip mines. So at the end of the day, we need to think about what it is we want and what is our energy consumption. I believe you can strike a balance between finding natural resources to provide the energy that we want and still protect the environment. Yesterday I was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal, and it talked about people who want to go strictly to these new sources of energy, wind and solar, but people don't realize in order to mine the different chemical compounds that you need out of the ground, lithium and those types of things, takes an awful lot of excavation. This is happening in other countries. We're not even sure that they will allow us to do it to the magnitude it would take if you want to solely go to all electric vehicles. We've seen brownouts, blackouts. People need to realize even if we were to overnight be able to put every car into electric, we may not have a grid to sustain that. You got to be smart and think about those types of things. At the end of the day, somebody has to generate electricity. It does not come out of the sky, so you will have to burn some other resource to generate electricity, whether it's diesel fuel, gas. Natural gas happens to be one of the more cleaner and more efficient type of resources. And so I think while we can look at alternatives, wind and solar, unless all of us are willing to change our own utilization of energy, we're fooling ourselves to think that it's just going to be overnight change. I believe there's room in the different portfolios. We're looking at some different solar proposals in our own legislature. As you know, there's a new petrochemical company going to be coming online here not too far down the road. This is an opportunity to take care of natural resources that we have to produce energy for ourselves and other agricultural needs, and we're doing it in very smart ways. Today, they're able to ascertain natural gas, mine it out of the ground by drilling 20,000 feet from where they inserted the original hole. All subterranean, not interrupting topographic visual things that people would see, and it's not like the old strip mining. We're using today's technology to do things better and smarter. And if you look, in the last 14 years, Pennsylvania's carbon emissions have been reduced significantly. I believe 22% from where they were, and most of that is because of the natural gas industry. So I do believe that we can strike a balance between finding alternative energy sources. We have to think about the cost of those types of things. And the last thing I'd say is, while some of these other things sound like they're the panacea, whether it's solar or wind, solar panels and all the things entailed in building them, number one, do not happen unless you have mining practices. But more importantly, we need to think about the environmental impact, of what do we do when these things wear out? How do we dispose of them? Historically, a lot of times they were sent to neighboring countries and they would burn them to get the precious metals out of them, not worrying about the pollution they created. So we have to be very careful, I think, and be smart about the potential and future environmental impact that we may create by switching over completely versus trying to strike a balance between the different alternative energy sources.
With as divided as our nation, state, and even local communities have become, what steps are you doing to lower that temperature?
You know, it's interesting you say that, because if you look throughout history, people would say that just about every decade. There's always a division in ideology. But number one, I'd say, first of all, has to start with us as individuals. You have to choose to be angry about things all the time. You have to choose to be pushing your ideas on somebody in an aggressive manner. One of the things I've encouraged people, in politics, it's not necessarily a bad thing to have a differing opinion. We often will hear that the Democrats and Republicans were wrangling over something. Well, that is our process, and at the end of the day, you get a better product. People don't necessarily understand when you watch the debates, and some people get a little bit more boisterous. And obviously with today's social media, it's easier to see that and or sometimes only see snippets. But our process of debating ideas, putting all kinds of different ideas, whether it's the environmental issues you and I just talked about, different beliefs in energy, different ways of educating people, the more input that we have with differing ideas eventually makes a better product. I've often used the analogy, if you look at a soldier's dress sword, well, it doesn't start like that. It starts by somebody having the intelligence to realize that within a pile of dirt, there's metallic material in there. And there's a way to clean that. And you get that material out of there, and you heat it, and you process it, and you shape it, and you heat it some more. At the end of the day, it's this old raw iron ore that turns into this great product. Well, the legislative process may not be as smooth at times, but at the end of the day, it's very similar. You take a multitude of ideas and you work them through the process. That's why we have committees. We have a very strong committee system, and our committees are to have hearings and discussions amongst themselves as well as public hearings. As you know, we've gone a lot more digital with that, and we get input from other people. And eventually some of these ideas rise to the point where they get voted out of committee, they go to the floor, and then all the representatives can vote on that. And if it passes, gets enough votes, it goes to the Senate, goes through the same process, and we have a check and balance system. If the governor doesn't like it or doesn't like part of it, he can veto it. That may not be a perfect process in some people's opinion, but it is the process of making things better by discussion and debate and other people's opinions. It's a responsibility. If you love this country and you love this state and you want to make things better, then look towards the positive. Focus on those things. Help out your neighbor. Check on somebody you haven't seen for a while. Do something nice for somebody that wasn't expecting it. And in return, let's get people back to working. I believe people working is healthy for them. I'll close on that topic. Last year, I talked to 5 100-year-olds, and I asked them all the same question. What do you attribute your longevity to? And they all said the same thing, not together, separately. Keeping busy, keeping out and about. And we see more older people going back in the workforce. And it's not always necessary for the economics, but it's for the socialization. And that's one of the top issues we've heard through this pandemic shutdown is the impact on a lot of our older people and people in general being huddled up in their homes and not being able to have that interaction. And that's still a problem within our nursing homes, and we really need to help integrate them.
Are there any upcoming pieces of legislation that you'd like to highlight for our readers?
Well, as I said, we are working on several different bills, some more regulatory reform. We have a pretty extensive election reform bill that would be coming. We have the money that's been coming in from the federal government, and we're still waiting for some specifics on how that can be spent. Predominantly, we've been told it can't be used for tax reduction and or it needs to be spent by 2024. But we also need to see what other flexibilities are in there. Our goal is to pass a balanced budget on time, no significant increases, no tax increases at all, but there may be some increases in a little bit of spending here and there. As I said, we want to make sure that our education system, whether it's K through 12 or the higher education, we are working legislation, obviously, to try to help some of our smaller business and how we can incentivize them, how to help bring them out of this pandemic. Yes, there was some money that came in from the federal government, but in addition to those types of things, our goal predominantly is economic recovery and building our state stronger. I have a personal goal, as I somewhat tongue-in-cheek say in my office, I want Pennsylvania to be the envy of the East. And what I mean by that is I want other states looking at Pennsylvania saying, those people are on fire. Eventually lowering our corporate net income tax. This is an issue the governor and I actually agree on. How we get there are different approaches, but we can't be the highest corporate net income tax in the country and almost across the world and wonder why people don't want to bring a business here. People go to work, whether it's employer or employee, to earn income, take care of their families. We need to incentivize people to want to keep their businesses here and to bring to Pennsylvania. We have such beautiful natural resources here, beautiful geography. I want people to want to come here to Pennsylvania and at the end of the day say they got a great workforce, they're lowering their costs to operate here, they're smarter about the regulations, they're driving healthcare costs down. I want to bring my business to Pennsylvania.
With the rate of vaccinations slowing rather dramatically to the point of incentives being offered by state governments, for example, Ohio and their vaccination lottery, what would you say to anyone who is still on the fence about getting a vaccine or has refused one? And are there any plans being developed to provide education or incentive to get us to herd immunity?
Well, we are pushing those numbers, and at the end of the day, this is America, and people had the decision to make what's comfortable for them. There are some people maybe with some health issues that are uncomfortable with that, but I think the majority of people are heading that road. Make decisions sometimes not even just for themselves, but for their own families. We are doing better, and there will always just be that percentage of people who may not necessarily do that, but the herd immunity helps to try to get that overall safer for our communities in general. I mean, you could say that just about any illness. This one just happened to get hyped up a lot more, and we had a lot more information thrown at us because we were able to see what's happening in other countries. And as you know, the media played it over and over and over. But, we lose a lot of people every year to the flu, and there are those people who choose not to get vaccinated there. I think we're going to get there. And I think we're seeing better compliance on a day-to-day basis. And I would encourage people, the vaccine doesn't cost you anything. It's one of the few things in life that doesn't cost anything. We're providing it, and there's either you can get one shot or you can do two. Center of Volunteers in Medicine, I think, just tipped over 23,000 vaccines that they provided. We really put a shout out to all the volunteers that are helping in these different clinics throughout our community.
This is sort of a personal question because I live in the district, but
Sure.
The Bellefonte Area School District recently endured a year of back and forth about the school's mascot and nickname. And I know you're in the district as well. What are your thoughts on how that played out?
I think you're going to maybe get your answer tomorrow. There are a lot of people that are very frustrated over that, and you saw a lot of signs up in support, mascots, As you know, through the pandemic, we were pushing back a little bit against the governor because parents were told they couldn't even go to their own children's events. We even had PIAA who came out in support of that. These are rallying ports for people, and sometimes I think we get too caught up in some of these symbols. But for Bellefonte, obviously the Red Raider was something people have known for generations. And I think about the time I was at a graduation ceremony and they had 3 World War II veterans come back. These are young men that were plucked out of high school at 17 years old, didn't get to graduate. They were still proud Red Raiders. And that night they finally got the diploma 60 years later. And that night they were Red Raiders. And everyone I was in the stand that stood by these men that fought for a country of freedom, we were all Red Raiders. And so it's a little tough challenge for some people to see these things change. There are also the concerns of the economic impact of having to change all these things at the school. You hate to see a school spend a year on that. I hope that we put as much emphasis and focus on academic success. And I measure academic success by how many of these children are employed 5 years later in good family-sustaining jobs. How many of them went on to higher education after that. So there's a lot of things to be considered, but at the end of the day, these boards are independently elected by the public, and the public has to decide whether or not they support that decision.
That's really all I have. I'll turn it back over to our publisher, Bob Rowley.
Well, thanks, Kerry Benninghoff,
My pleasure.
Republican from Center and Mifflin Counties and the House Majority Leader, for coming to Lock Haven and the Express Community newspaper to talk to us. We appreciate this, and we hope to see you again in the future. And
Absolutely.
We'll end this today with telling everybody to get out there and vote tomorrow, Tuesday, May 18th, 2021. Thanks very much.
Appreciate your time.